Self-awareness is a starting point for many areas of personal and professional growth. But most people don't know what it is or how to develop it. So join me, Kevin Dugan, a not-so-sikat emotional intelligence practitioner and facilitator, as I have short conversations with different people on how self-awareness relates to our lives and how we can grow it. Right. Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Now I See Me Self-Awareness podcast. In this episode, we'll talk about the relationship between personal financial management and self-awareness. Joining us are Brian Portnoy, author of the books The Geometry of Wealth and The Investor's Paradox. He joins us from Chicago. From California, we're also joined by Joy Lere, psychologist whose expertise includes behavioral finance. From Iloilo, we have Marvin Chin, a practicing Stoic who runs a couple of businesses. And Sabine Chuangbian, who previously joined us when we were defining self-awareness for Gen Z. Right. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Good evening. How are we all?
It's great to join you today.
Thanks, Joy. Brian, how's Chicago?
It's becoming warmer. Chicago winters are kind of notorious, but spring has sprung, and things are looking good here.
Oh, great. And Marvin?
Hey, so it's lockdown here again in Iloilo, so we just have to stay indoors and be safe.
Yeah, same here in Manila. So we're all trying to reduce that infection rate. But yeah, these are the circumstances we're in. Thanks, everybody. So tonight we'll be talking about personal finance, like I said earlier, personal finance, personal financial management and self-awareness. And one of the questions that we'd like to ask, especially for Brian and Joy, is how important is self-awareness in terms of personal financial management?
Well, I'll take a stab at answering that, and I know Joy has a lot of insight as well. I'll start off by saying that money is a multifaceted experience. Part of it, obviously, is just very, quantitative and organizational. We use money to buy things. It's a means of exchange. It's a store of value over time. But actually, money is a whole lot more, including an emotional journey. It's connected to our sense of self, our sense of self-importance, and there are various forms of well-being that we all explore and seek out: physical well-being, emotional, spiritual. Well, financial well-being is real as well, and part of that quest for financial well-being isn't just the technical parts of money, having a budget or saving the right amount or earning the right amount at your job. It's also asking how money fits into the life that you want to lead, how it leads into the good life, however you define that. And so as a result, self-awareness is absolutely critical with personal financial management. We are generally wired our brains are wired to make pretty lousy decisions about money. It's hard to save more. It's hard to spend less. It's hard to do some of the basic rules of personal finance. And as a result, the more that we know ourselves, the more we can make some of those decisions holistically and with better outcomes. I'd hand it over to Joy because I know she has some thoughts as well.
So
thanks, Brian.
I really believe that the path to success is paved with self-awareness. So much of money management and building the financial future that many people aspire to has to do with, ultimately, at the end of the day, action and behavior and some of those choices and habits that people put in place. But before we can get to that place of self-management, we need to start with self-awareness. So starting with understanding, recognizing, being able to label what is going on inside of you. So a lot of times people think about their emotions and they like to maybe label them as good or bad. Now, I look at it a little bit differently. I like to think about emotions not as good or bad, but as uncomfortable, more and less comfortable for people to sit with and tolerate. Now, all of our emotions have functions and they are to give us information. So slowing down, having that process of being able to look inside and ask, what are my feelings telling me? Now, with the feelings I'm experiencing, what do I do with that information? And how can I now make a choice that is going to ultimately lead me closer to where I want to go and create the future I'm saying I want for myself?
Thank you. Thanks, Joy. Marvin, what do you think?
I totally agree with both, of course, and just like what both said, self-awareness is really important in general, I believe. I'm not sure how you define it, but the idea of being aware as much as you can with your tendencies, be it the good or the bad, or as Joy said, be it the uncomfortable or less uncomfortable or comfortable, right? And it puts you in a better position to make more sound decisions. So personal finance included, it makes you reevaluate things, whether this is actually a healthy or unhealthy tendency. And and at least you question things before they do permanently they permanently damage you in some sense.
Mm,
So personal self-awareness is really important, because without that you just dabble your way through life and you let your irrational emotions or irrational feelings dictate your decisions.
right. Thank you. Thanks, guys. So, um, you guys are talking about just generally the self, right? And how we're able to, number one, understand how our brains work, how our emotions work, what these things are telling us, and how we can manage these things so that um, that we do have better decisions, right? Especially when it comes to finances. But well, for most Filipino and Asian families, uh, Asia, and especially here in the Philippines, we our families are very close, right? So we tend to have to support to each other a lot. We tend to have to support each other a lot, even with finances. So you will have in one home, like for my home, for example, there are two grandmothers, my aunt, my uncle, two cousins. Depends. Sometimes it's one, two. But that said, it can be quite challenging to manage personal finances. So how would you guys, from your perspectives, how can we fund happiness? How can we fund contentment? How can we be better at managing our finances in this context, and considering how what you guys also mentioned about self-awareness?
So, Kevin, I want to start by just acknowledging that families are complex systems. And I think understanding that within a system, which is ultimately a group of people, the choices and behavior of one individual will have a knock on effect on the other people. And I think when thinking about your financial choices, your financial goals, understanding how that is couched within a cultural system and the milieu in which you exist is really important. And I think what's really important for families is communication. So being able to talk about what are my goals, what are my desires, and how does that fit within the collective? What are our shared goals and our shared desires? And having honest conversations about what individuals' hopes, wishes, and expectations are. Because I think a lot of times what can happen in couples or in families is people come together and in their mind, they have different assumptions about
Mhm.
what should happen. But those things don't necessarily match up. So you can't just assume that things are going to neatly and nicely fall together, because life doesn't happen like that. So really being intentional about communication every step of the planning process is really important for families.
Can I just
Joy?
can I just
Sure.
jump onto that, because I thought that was just an amazing answer. And I would say that if true contentment and happiness really does stem from self-awareness, that also includes transparency. That includes, as Joy just eloquently stated, the ability to communicate where you're coming from and where you want to go. We all have families. We know it gets complicated. Here in America, the family structure is probably a little different than sort of what is normal in the Philippines. That said, taking care of aging parents, raising small children, being part of a multi-generational story in which you are one of the authors of what is going to take place. It's a lot of work, but it's also joyful. There are some very deep sources of contentment in our lives, and the sense of belonging, the sense of togetherness ranks number one among them all. It's
Mm.
just who we are. We are social beings, and we are born into families. I just really want to echo Joy's point about communication and being able to share as best as possible where within the family structure, where people are where any particular individual is coming and going through the work. And it's very hard work. We all experience it in one way or another across generations. It's really hard but important work to align what's best for the individual and what's at the same time what's best for the group.
Right. And I want to add, so Brian, you mentioned it's a lot of work. It's also joyful, and so I used to live alone. I lived alone for quite a few years, and I'd have to admit that my financial choices when I was living alone was probably a lot worse than when I decided to rejoin my family. So yeah, it's a lot of rejoining family, living with family again. There was a lot of work involved towards communicating, not just finances, but a lot of other things. But it was definitely joyful work. And for me, it was a lot, there was a lot of support towards developing my own awareness, not just financial awareness, but a lot of other things. So yes, thanks. Marvin, did
Kevin,
you
can I
want
add
to?
something?
Sure, Marvin.
Yes. So I really like both Brian and Joy's answer, and I also that's also what I practice for the most part. But just to give you guys a bit of context in the Philippine setting. So I came from a really huge family. I have four siblings, so we're five. And then my mother's side, they're 11 in the family, and my dad's side, there's six in the family. So I have over 30 cousins, and I also have nephews and even grandsons now, even though I'm just 25, because we're a huge family. So, and it gets really complicated, and as much as I'd like the idea of transparency and communication, but if you're dealing with people coming from different backgrounds, like I'm really fortunate to have a good family in a sense that we were raised well, and I got really good education, but not all of my cousins went to like as good schools as I did. Some cousins even like wasn't able to finish college, and I even had the family member died of OD, and most of it were these are extreme cases, because but that's the average life of Filipino families. And as much as we'd like to communicate to some of, I'm not saying this from my family exactly, because I'm lucky to be blessed with a really good family, even though we're that big. But some families, they came from like the poorest of the poor, and no matter how you communicate with them, it's difficult to get things through, because one, it's they weren't necessarily, they haven't what do you call this, they haven't surpassed the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like they're still at the point of just surviving, having enough to live, to survive, to eat, shelter, and security. So they haven't reached that point yet of self-awareness, even, or they're not even at that point of questioning things, because they just dabble their way through life just to survive. So my point is for the Filipinos listening, I think you just have to be aware of the tendencies of people who can't really understand as much as you'd like them to understand, even though, because there are Filipinos, like they're giving everything they have to their family, yet those the ones asking are still saying it's not
Mm,
enough, or complaining. But is this everything that you've got? Like, are you that
mm,
selfish? You can't even give 10,000 pesos to your nephew for his first birthday, something like that, when they don't even have anything to begin with. So that's just the context I want to share with you guys for the sake of the Filipinos listening.
Marvin, I really want to thank you for sharing your story. I think what you just described, you said these are some extreme examples, but I think you beautifully illustrated the fact that all families, I can tell you this as a therapist, all families are messy. There are complexities in every system. And what you described, I think, is common and a really big challenge. First of all, we have the reality that money is a taboo topic. It is difficult to discuss. Another added layer of complexity happens when there is a discrepancy in level of financial literacy, understanding, financial means, affluence between two groups. Then you're trying to bridge multiple things in your communication. People may have feelings about being a have or a have not, and that all creates multiple layers of complexity on top of something that is already challenging.
yeah. I wanted to share a bit of my story. Thanks, Joy. Thanks, Marvin. So yeah, it is complex, but so um, on my father's side, let me just share this very quickly. My father's side is, I wouldn't say wealthy, but we probably upper middle class or lower upper class, whatever. And then on my mother's side, my mother's side is probably what you would call masa in the Philippines. So part of the masses, maybe borderline poverty. Right? Some of them are borderline poverty. And we would have on that side of the family, I would have to support my grandmother with her medicines, and maybe once in a while help with expenses for my cousins on that side. And it was challenging. It was messy, but then the way I approached it was in a more calm manner, more calm in the sense that and they may not totally understand that I cannot always provide a certain amount. But then when I do provide, I try to approach it with, how do I explain it? An openness of my heart, openness and compassion. And so when I do that, it's their response is less hostile when I'm not able to give as much. So to the Filipino families who are listening, who are going through this conflict, uh, I think it does get messy, but it doesn't necessarily have to always be that way, right? There, that's just what I wanted to share.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Thanks. Anything else that you guys wanted to share about this topic?
I so appreciate everyone's candor and humility. I think what we're doing here, hopefully, is even a model or an inspiration
Right.
for the way one might go about achieving more self-awareness and, partly in connection, financial well-being and well-being generally. Yeah, you said, everyone said in their own way, families are messy. Trust me, my family is a mess. Um, it's hard, and in the same way you clean up your house or tidy up, 2 or 3 days later, it's messy again. Entropy is not only a thing in physics, it's a thing in our lives. Things kind of fall apart, but messy doesn't have to mean painful. If we feel like we are in a process of understanding and trying to do better, trying to earn small wins. I think one of the big challenges with investing in finance, at least from an American perspective, is that people aim for a number. I want X number of dollars. I want Y number of pesos. I want to get to that big number, and then everything will be okay. Well, we know from psychological research that it doesn't work that way, that having that one big goal, it's whether or not you achieve it, it doesn't deliver the well-being that you think that it does, because then there's always something next. So the importance in this process that we're talking about of achieving small wins, little things along the way that give us confidence and reinforce that we're moving in the right direction, super important. So to the extent that this journey for people involves getting little things done frequently as opposed to one big thing way in the distant future, I would strongly advocate one over the other.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely, Brian. Small wins, and that's how I've been trying to manage um, my finances and my relationships with both sides of the family, both father's side and mother's side. Thanks.
Brian,
Great
I
con-
appreciated
Yep.
that you said that it doesn't have to be painful. A theme that has been brought up today is this idea of discomfort. And discomfort is an inevitable part of life. And when we think about growth and challenge in our lives, you know, a lot of times we like to be comfortable. We like to feel very safe and secure and not be kind of pushed outside of our comfort zone. But I have found time and time again that when we can step into that zone of discomfort and really turn into that is where real growth happens in our lives.
Right. And I'm hoping, thanks, Joy, and I'm hoping that this, what we're doing, and the rest of these podcasts on self-awareness help us understand how to go into that discomfort, how to approach that discomfort. And talking about that, I wanted to bring up another question. How do we actually, what are the actionable things that individuals in developing countries like the Philippines or Haiti or wherever else, places in Africa and the rest of Asia, what are the actionable things that people can do to develop self-awareness in terms of personal financial management? What are the things that you guys have done?
I'll go first and
Sure.
say that there's I'll call it a top-down strategy and a bottom-up strategy. And we've actually been talking this whole time about the top-down strategy, which is self-reflection, going through the hard work of knowing yourself better and what you want. And I feel like all of you have made amazing points. So I'll kind of leave that alone there, or I won't elaborate further. The bottom up is very practical. What flashes into my mind is a wonderful short book by a man named Atul Gawande called The Checklist Manifesto. And it puts forth what sounds to be a pretty obvious thesis, but when you get into it, you realize it's hard work. As is communicated in the name, the Checklist Manifesto, there's something very empowering about getting organized and going through the different dimensions of your life that need to be basically written on paper or typed into your notes field on your phone, or wherever your comfortable place is, and to use that as a very practical tool for getting things done. As I mentioned earlier, there's really no substitute for a lot of small wins over time. They sort of serve as a constant wind in our sails. They move us forward rather than one big gust that comes and goes. And so making lists, getting organized, recognizing that, specifically in the area of personal financial management, there are so many little details for everybody. It doesn't matter if you have a little, if you have a lot, there's just so many moving pieces. Feeling like you know what all of those pieces are, and even if they're not organized, how you would like them to look when they are organized, that's a win. That's a really big win. And so I hope it doesn't come out as too kind of obvious or beyond obvious, but getting organized, making lists, and putting yourself in a position to get things done, it's really important.
Mhm. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I checked out Atul Gawande right just now. Thanks. Joy, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
I absolutely agree with what Brian said. And when I think about, I'm going to go back to then the top down. And when I think about just the basics of self-awareness and where you start, it begins with identifying and labeling your emotions. And this is something, it sounds so simple, but oftentimes the things that are simple in life are not necessarily easy to do. And if you haven't grown up in an environment where you've had caregivers who've helped kind of, in psychology, what we call mirror, or help you develop the language for you to be able to identify what you are feeling, to then be able to communicate it to others, that is a skill that sometimes people need to develop later in life. A lot of times that's some of the work I'm doing in therapy. A lot of people, people joke, oh, therapists are always asking, what are you feeling? What are you feeling, ad nauseum? But there's a reason, because as we can become more adept at identifying and labeling our emotions, we can step back and self-reflect and go back to the question I raised at the beginning of our discussion today. This idea of what information is my emotion giving me, and then using that information to be able to communicate that in our relationships to get our needs met.
Thanks, Joy. Thank you. Marvin, did you want to add to that?
Yes, sir. So for me, I have basically two things: modeling and mindfulness exercises. So when I say modeling, it's basically what happened to me when I first realized that there's more to life than how I'm living it. That's when I started. That's I got a sight of that when I started reading books. So unfortunately, I'm a late bloomer. I started reading books like self-help books after college. So that's when I realized, like, oh damn, there's more to life than how I'm living it right now. And the more I read, the more I listen to podcasts, I learn a lot of stuff about people who have experienced it firsthand. So I'm saying this because it's really difficult to just be self-aware all of a sudden. And first, like, what happened to me is that I basically studied like people I admired the most in life, and I kept reading them. And then the most common denominator I saw among all of them is they're really aware. Their self-awareness is really good. And among all those self-aware people, the mindfulness exercises were somehow similar. And that's like meditation, journaling, being present, being aware, or at least having awareness exercises where, like, random time of the day, just pause and be aware of everything, of your surrounding. And it basically gives you a sense of comfort and the time to relax and not let the day-to-day things take control of you. Instead, you be more present, so you take control of your time and your emotions and whatnot. So yeah, mindfulness exercises and modeling.
Thanks, Marvin. Which reminded me of, so maybe I'd like to put what the three of you mentioned into context or into a story. So um, I don't know, many years ago, I don't even remember how old I was. Um, I was riding a Jeep. So Joy, Brian, a Jeep here in the Philippines is public transportation. Maybe 15, 20 people will fit in it. And I suddenly realized I only had 20 pesos left. And uh, I would have panicked, but then, I went into that mindful, I started realizing what I was feeling and what I was thinking. And I did identify at that time, I did try to identify what I was experiencing. So I was experiencing panic and and then I just went into that mode of trying to understand, okay, what are the actionable steps I can do to get myself out of this situation? So it was a good thing that I was passing passing near a friend's house. So I stopped at my friend's I stopped to got off the Jeep at my friend's house and asked for a little extra money and paid him back the next day. So um I think what I'd like to say here is that we a lot of people, a lot of Filipinos, I think, kind of think of personal financial management as something complex, as something only attainable by those who have a degree or or a lot of experience. But it's something that we can all do, right? and we can approach it from different aspects. We can approach it top down, um, through mindfulness, through understanding our emotions, identifying our emotions, and then um, having understanding the actions that we want to take from those emotions. So we can do it from the bottom up, as Brian mentioned, through these checklists, through organizing ourselves. And one of the things that Brian mentions in his book is, and that's something, Brian, when I read your book, that's something that I realized I should have done a long time ago, was just really check, um, what is that you said? You mentioned do a personal review of your finances.
Mm-hmm.
What is, what was that term you called? It's an audit or something like
Uh-huh.
that, a personal audit.
Yep.
Yeah. And I realized I hadn't really done that in a really long time. So that's also something I could have done. Um, it's something that I didn't want to do also before because I was just ashamed of the bad financial decisions that I made many years ago. So thanks for that. So um, yeah. Sorry, you were going to say something?
No, I just thank you. It's so meaningful when, the words, I write, I know Joy feels the same, that they can make an impact. Um, and I think one lesson that you just pointed to is just being able to take stock. I can assure you, there, here in America, all over the world, taking a close look at your finances is hard work because a lot of the times we just don't want to know. Unfortunately and fortunately, knowledge is power. And when we have that knowledge, when we've done that audit, when we've figured out a lot of the details of our financial lives, we've given ourselves a superpower to move much higher. But it's hard to achieve those higher levels without that knowledge.
Kevin, you shared something that's important that I am confident you are not alone in. And that is this idea of shame. I think
Mhm.
a lot of times people look at their financial lives and they recognize there is a real disconnect between where they are and where they want to be. And they may look back at decisions or things that they are labeling as mistakes that they've made. And people can very quickly become really self-critical with themselves. And I think even a lot of the rhetoric with behavioral finance up until this point, in some ways, has not done anyone any favors around this. A lot of the language that a lot of people use are, well, I was irrational, I was misbehaving. But the truth is, it's really important that people have self-compassion because money
Right.
is complex, it is emotionally charged, and it is difficult. And because of the way our brains are naturally wired, our environments, our emotions, our own personal histories, these things come together and can often don't set us up in the best ways to make the most productive financial choices. So it's important to have compassion with yourself. And sometimes when we look back at something and we wish it would have gone different, being able to say to yourself, well, I did the best with what I had at that time. And then looking at, well, what can I control now? Right now, I can control what is right in front of me and my future actions and behavior. And then reshifting your attention there, I think, is really important. This idea of avoidance is also very natural. Looking at your financial situation for a lot of people is very anxiety provoking. And the way that humans Sometimes we manage anxiety in different ways. Sometimes we deny and avoid, and that's to create some self-protective different distance from something that's going to be uncomfortable. Sometimes people become preoccupied with the thing that they are anxious about and become overactive. You sometimes see this playing out with people financially, but know that avoidance is natural, and there's a reason you want to kind of push that away. But if you can begin to address that and do what you can to take an honest look at where you are, that is going to be an important step to get you to where you want to ultimately go.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you. Right, great. We talked about a lot of great things, and I hope whoever's listening, you're listening. I hope you got you learned quite a few things about self-awareness and personal financial management. And we're about to end our podcast, but before that, does anybody else want to add a few words, some parting words?
I mean, I'll just congratulate you, Kevin, for just inspiring the conversation. They say the first part to running a race is tying your shoes. We all need to tie our shoes every day, and sometimes it's kind of hard. Sometimes we don't want to do it. We don't want to put those shoes on. So this sort of conversation, whether you're in Chicago or San Francisco or Manila or anywhere else in the world, it starts with tying your shoes. And I think that's some of what we've done today.
Thanks, Brian. Yep, that's where it starts. Yep. Joy, Marvin, Joy, anything that you'd like to say before we say goodbye?
Well, I just want to thank you again for sharing your platform with us, and for everything that you and Marvin have shared. I appreciate the courage it takes to be authentic and vulnerable about these kinds of conversations. But I think the more that people can start to talk out loud and acknowledge that this is not easy, this is challenging, and no one has it all figured out, the less alone people can feel. And the more empowered they are going to be to start asking questions. And it's when we can be curious and ask questions, that's when we can learn more. And the more we learn, the better we can do.
Right. Thanks, Joy. Marvin?
All right. So first, I'd like to say thank you so much, Kevin, for this opportunity and for introducing me to Joy and Brian and Sabine. I'm really grateful for having learned from you guys tonight, and I thank you for your compassion and also your wisdom that you've shared to me and to everyone listening.
Well, it's shared wisdom, shared compassion as well, Marvin. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this podcast. So for those who are listening, the Now I See Me podcasts are part of a series of podcasts on self-awareness. And tonight we defined how the importance of self-awareness in personal financial management. If you'd like to learn more, reach out to us. There'll be links to Acuerdo, and we'll put in some information on how to reach us through email, mobile, or through Facebook. Thank you. Thanks for listening. We hope that you're able to take something away from this podcast that will help you on your self-awareness journey. If you would like to learn how to further develop your self-awareness, send us an email at acuerdo.inquiry@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at Acuerdo Learning.